It is my pleasure to introduce to you Ms. Jane Kuchar-Reed, who is formerly of Westerville, Ohio, and now resides in Greenville, South Carolina. She is an internationally recognized Suzuki Piano Teacher Trainer, Piano Educator, and Motivational Speaker. After earning a degree in piano performance from the University of Findlay, she found her calling in piano pedagogy. As she teaches throughout the US and other countries, she dedicates herself to promoting finer education for students, teachers, and parents through deeper thinking, validated learning skills, and building meaningful relationships between the child, parent, and teacher. She and her husband founded Solutionary Insights, an educational business dedicated to nurturing thinking minds. The unique signature of this business is the intertwining of the respect of the value of individuals and the belief that all are capable of excellence, and the resolve that fine and purposeful teaching and parenting develops outstanding abilities. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Jane Kuchar-Reed. Take it away, Jane. I'll put you on speaker view too.
Thank you. It is just great to be with all of you today. So many of you would think of this as distance learning and distance educating, but I would far rather think that I'm welcoming you into my very own studio, where we all have a cup of coffee and a piece of cake to nibble on, and we can hug each other and visit. Or better yet, since I moved down here from Columbus, it's nice for me to feel like I'm at home with all of you, in a great place where I know that music education is strong and of really high quality. So today, I would like to be somewhat interactive, and if we get too loud in the background, I'll have you all mute, but feel free to jump in with questions. We'll try to field those. I'm here because I'm excited about learning. So if you are excited about learning, will you shout whoopee?
Whoopee!
Whoopee!
Yay! I appreciate that. That is great, because learning is what keeps us interesting and vital, and what helps us to be excellent leaders to our students. I'm also here to remind you of the significant impact of the work that you do every day as teachers. As you work side by side with students, you give a very precious part of yourselves during each minute as you convey your passion for music, your love of learning, and your love of the children that you teach. So thank you. And like all of you, I like to think that we make a very significant contribution, and that we have the opportunity to walk along beside our students, nudge them when we need to, because they are beautiful, fine, and noble human beings created to learn and created to have a wonderful relationship with us. So, what if we would go to our lessons and our students would walk in with stars in their eyes and smiles on their faces, eager to learn and ready to get busy on that piece that we're working on? How would you feel? I hope awesome, okay? And we're gonna work on the topic of inspiring the desire to learn. What about us, okay? Have you ever started your day before the first student walks in wondering, oh, I sure hope Johnny practiced today? Or have you ever thought, please make Mary behave today? Or have you ever just thought, please don't let anybody sneeze on my piano keys today? All right, now that we're virtual, that's probably not going to happen, but maybe thoughts that have entered your mind as teachers. But what if instead we thought about inspiring ourselves, and therefore having the ability to inspire others by thinking this: how can I be the teacher today that each child needs? What will it take? What will I have to do? What will I have to focus on? And that's a great step toward inspiring the desire to learn. So let's think for a minute how we can be inspiring ourselves because the best way to motivate a student is to be motivated ourselves. So let's take a minute, and I'm sure you all have teachers or mentors or grandparents or someone who really helped you thrive and really helped you learn. And can you share some of the characteristics that that particular role model had? And if you can just unmute and
Their willingness to listen.
to listen. I like that. Excellent. Their willingness to listen. Maybe they loved what they did.
Mm-hmm.
Were they pretty knowledgeable in their field? They loved what they did and they loved you as well.
Mm-hmm.
They were capable. They were interesting. The one teacher that really did the most for me saw a spark in me that I didn't see in myself. And I think that's something we really want to do. Okay, what is unique about every student that walks in your door? And how can you take that uniqueness and build it into masterful skills? They taught us how to learn. They gave us strong core skills. And they gave us the ability to take what we learned from them and apply it to future learning that we might do on our own. So we can motivate ourselves to be that person by wondering, being curious, learning something new every day, or as often as possible. Don't get stuck in the old mire. What's another thing that inspires the desire to learn? I think a lot of it is truly dependent upon our philosophy. What is our purpose as teachers? And how do we fulfill that? So I'm going to share an old story that I love to tell. And it's based on discovering purpose. So back in about the 4th century AD, long, long ago, a philosopher was walking down the street and he decided to interview workers. And so he walked up to a first man and he said to that man, "What do you do for a living?" And the man said, "Every day I go down into that hole in the earth and I limestone blocks that are 1 foot by 1 foot by 3/4 of a foot, and I will do it till I die." Well, the philosopher thought maybe he should keep walking. Okay, and so he came across another man and he said to him, "And what do you do for a living?" And that man said, "I'm very grateful that every day I get to go down into that stone quarry and cut limestone blocks that are 1 foot by 1 foot by 3/4 of a foot. Because I have this great job, I can provide a home and food and education for my children and my wife that I love so dearly. And I'm happy that it allows me to do things in life that I want to do." So we're getting better. So the philosopher or the interviewer walked down the street and met one other man. And he said to this man, "And what do you do for a living?" And the man said, "Every day," and he was beaming with joy as he spoke, "every day I get to go into that quarry and I get to build limestone blocks, cut limestone blocks that are 1 foot by 1 foot by 3/4 of a foot. And I know that those blocks are being pulled up out of the quarry to build a cathedral that will be a light that shines for hundreds of years to thousands of people." What was the difference in their perspective? How can we compare to that? Have you ever felt like, "Oh man, if I can just get through this day, if I can just get through this hour, okay, if I can just get these kids to play, that maybe it'll all be okay. I can get done teaching, put on my jammies, and all will be good. Maybe we felt that way, but let's at least be the second stonecutter. Okay, what about the days when you think, I'm so happy to have this job because I get to interact with children, I get to explore music that I love, I'm making a good living, and maybe I'll even turn out some champions at the Buckeye auditions. Hey, we're getting better. But what if you are the third stonecutter? How would that change your perspective? And how would that change the perspective of those who teach? Because you see in each of those little blocks that you teach an opportunity to mold them into something that will benefit themselves and others for a lifetime. I vote for the third stonecutter. How about you? Okay, and so our question is, how can we become the stonecutter that was making a difference and that had a vision of the future? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some of my journey as a teacher, and it probably wasn't as glorious as Sally. Sally, you're a hard act to follow. Okay, but basically I'm going to share things that helped me learn, and I hope will help you learn too. Okay, so when I first finished taking teacher training, I wanted to be the best teacher in the world, which we already know is so self-centered that it can't ever be possible. Okay, but I was on fire, ready to go. So I began my teaching, and I believed that if I just had students who would really listen to me, that I could tell them what to do, and I could teach them every little nuance, every little phrase, every little dynamic marking, every little special thing to do so that when they performed, they were amazing. And I taught like this for a while, and I will say there were some very successful moments. And then I started to analyze what was really going on. I realized that when it came to learning a new piece, they didn't seem to have any initiative. They were waiting for me to tell them what to do. Even though I thought I had taught them tremendous core skills, they didn't seem to know how to use them. And that everything was dependent on my actions instead of their learning. So I started to think, wow, is it possible that sometimes as teachers, our competency actually gets in the way of fine teaching? Do we focus too much on what we can say and what we can tell? I realized that I thought every lesson was learner-centered. After all, I'm right there one-on-one with every student, engaged as we went, but I realized that in essence, it was teacher-centered, and that I needed to make a change in order to help the students learn better. So I happened to have a really good mentor, okay? And one day this mentor said to me, you know what, Jane? I think you should stop talking so much when you teach. As you can tell, I like to talk, all right? Still enjoy talking, so this is a perfect venue for me, all right? And she said, why don't you be quiet and demonstrate more? Whoa, that was a pretty good idea. And I tried it. And I was very excited about it because when we play for students, it says a lot more than our words. Okay, when we ask them to listen to things, they become way more engaged. And then I had this delightful little blue-eyed blonde girl that came to me. Her name was Laura. And Laura was spunky and fun, but her attention span was approximately 5 minutes long, which meant that every 5 minutes we had a behavioral problem. Maybe you've had some students like that. And so one day when she was particularly rambunctious, I said, okay, we're going to have a silent lesson. I can't talk. You can't talk. We're not going to let talking get in the way of our learning. Okay, so, the first few minutes she still tried to talk, okay, but that's all right. But I started to play and she started to copy. And it took a while. Eventually, she started getting right notes, which she had never done before. So I'm feeling inspired by this. I played, she copied. Whoa, the tone started getting better. Amazing. It wasn't this raucous pushing and shoving that she was normally doing because she couldn't settle down. I was so excited about this lesson that I absolutely couldn't stand myself. And so I said, I can't wait to hear you next week when you come back and you have practiced what we learned today. So the next week they came back, and I'm a Suzuki teacher, so the parents come along and they take notes and they participate. And I said to the student, I can't wait to hear you play. And the dad stepped in and said, well, quite frankly, we had no idea what you were teaching last week, so we just didn't practice at all. Okay, and I realized that I had taken a really great idea. I still advocate silent lessons, or at least portions of them. Okay, they are really great, but what mistake had I made? It was a big one. I hadn't asked if they understood what we were doing. I hadn't given them insight in how to practice the same way. I hadn't asked what changed in your hand when the tone got better. How did you get those notes? And so because I hadn't asked any questions or filled them in on what to do, I had rendered them unable to learn. Whoa. So there's got to be a better way. There's got to be some way to pull together all the things that I've learned about teaching. So then I entered an interesting part of my life. Alrighty, and at that point, I met my good buddy Bob. Well, my husband Bob now. And Bob was an engineer. And he asked more questions than anyone I had ever met in my entire life. He would look at things and he would study things. And I would think, what's taking you so long? Okay, but when I met Bob, I was in a period of life called widowhood. And I was facing a lot of challenges and a lot of problems. And one day he sat across from me and he looked at me with his very beautiful green eyes and spoke in his gentle, soft voice. And he said, if you could learn to ask the right questions, you could find the answers you're looking for. My life was changed. I didn't feel trapped by not knowing. I realized that I could reach out and I could discover new things and I could solve problems because I wasn't just trapped in the biases that had controlled my life so far. And it was liberating. And so that caused me to think, whoa, if I can ask questions to serve and solve problems in my personal life, why couldn't I teach by asking questions? And that changed a whole path of my discovery of how to inspire the desire to learn. By the way, Bob asked me the right question. And so we've been problem solvers together ever since. And that's when we formed Solutionary Insights. And so hopefully we'll keep you up to date on that too. But let's get back to what we were talking about. So how would I change from telling people? Because what happens when we tell people what to do? They don't listen. Their minds flap shut. They might become distracted, okay? Because we're talking at them and not through them, okay? And so what do we have to do? We have to ask questions and we have to listen. There's a story of a mentor who was working with someone that he was hoping to help conquer some learning issues. And one day the mentor said to the mentee, "What is wrong with you? You used to participate. You used to be eager for us to meet together." And the person being taught said, "Well, you were always so busy telling me what was wrong that you never gave me the opportunity to tell what I didn't understand, what I needed to learn. And because of that, I just stopped asking." We don't want that situation. We want to be vibrant. We don't want our students to give up. Okay, so what we want to do is teach them to be curious. Okay, so what would spark the desire to learn? What would inspire that desire to learn? And so I started teaching by asking questions. But the way to ask questions is to be curious. What sparks that desire to learn that we call curiosity? A sound, a phrase, an interpretation of a piece, imagining what that piece might be teaching us. So let's get excited about learning, because first of all, what happens to us when we're not curious anymore? What happened to me when I was trapped in telling? Well, when we think we have all the answers, we don't try to learn anymore. And yet as teachers, one of our number one commitments needs to be to continuously learn. Do you know how exciting it is to learn something new? Anything new? I remember when I decided that I would learn to do Sudoku, which has nothing to do with music, of course. And of course, I tried to figure it out by just going in and trying, and I wasn't very effective. So I went on the internet and got lessons with the Sudoku professor. And he opened my mind with ways to ask new questions and to figure things out and to solve problems. And you know, it was so invigorating, and it reminded me that whenever we learn something new, we're excited and ready to learn something next that's new. We want that for ourselves. We want that for our students. So I would say to you, continually learn. You know, even if it's because the new festival bulletin came out and we have new pieces that we can learn so we can teach them to our children, that is exciting. That is far more exciting than just turning the page and teaching the next piece because it happens to be next in the repertoire book. So when we fail to be curious, we fail to look up and see the possibilities. We don't want to do that because that diminishes our beautiful inner spirit. And we want to have that beautiful inner spirit so that we can nurture that. So we engage others by allowing them to be part of the process, by involving them in the process. So I decided that I would start teaching by asking questions. Okay, now questions can be great and questions can be bad. So we need to learn a little bit about asking questions before I send you on your own to start teaching by asking questions this afternoon. Okay, one thing that is totally important is the tone with which you ask the question. Okay, so let's practice tone here a little bit. All right, so what if you said, and if your mic is muted, just pretend like you're saying it. Say it to yourselves and I'll try to hear. Okay, all righty, so we could sarcastic tone, great. But how would we say it in a beautiful tone? Great. Okay, or we might say beautiful in a gentle tone, meaning really that wasn't so beautiful. Or we could say it in a beautiful tone, beautiful. And our tone of our voice, the tone of our attitude, has as significant an impact on interacting with our students as the tone of the music that we create. And we know that tone is central to everything we teach. We could sit down at the piano, or we could have students come in and play on their instrument, and they could play every note perfectly, and it would still be ugly. Why? Because tone is what reaches us. Tone is what speaks to our hearts. Tone is what makes us want to engage. So we're going to start learning how to ask questions. Alrighty. So you should always be enthusiastic and have eye contact and show interest. 97% of communication is nonverbal. Okay. So make sure you're tuned in to the students. Okay. Quality questions cannot be answered in 1 or 2 words. Okay, they're sometimes called closed-ended questions, and sometimes we need closed-ended questions in order to get specifically to a truth that we need right away. But often we find when we ask a closed-ended question and a student replies with yes, no, don't care, that's the end of the process. Okay, that often a simple answer just means like, oh, we found the answer. We are not going to pursue any more. It actually, I'm going to digress here just a tiny, reminds me of a video I saw last summer. And in that video, high school students were being interviewed just before they were going to take one of these important tests that we know they all have to take. And the interviewer said to the students, what is more important to you, having the answer or being able to remember and use that answer in the future? 100% of the students said, I just want the answer. That was shocking to me. It made me worry about what we as teachers are doing, that they just want the answer, the yes, no, or the easy way. And so those students were tested and they did well, but 3 months later they were tested on the same material and they all failed because they saw no reason to remember what was learned, because they had passed the test and all they wanted to do was pass the test and get into college so they could do what they wanted to do. My question would be, once they get to college and they've only looked for the answers and they forgot those answers, what would they do if they forgot? In our profession, what will they do with the things we teach them if they don't use it? What will they do with the beautiful things we teach them if they can't someday take that knowledge and apply it to whatever they want to learn because we have taught them well? Okay, let's go back to criteria and great questions. Okay, great questions should spark curiosity, because remember, curiosity is that flame that starts learning. Okay, without curiosity, we're just like the first stone cutter. We need to engage the learner by involving him in the process. Again, if we're just asking questions like, what is that dynamic marking? What is the tempo marking? Okay, they're just giving us the answer, so we'll be quiet and then go ahead and start playing the piece. Okay, but we're going to learn to ask deeper questions, because really great questions should change our perspective. In other words, if we can ask a really great question, we won't be stuck in our old biases, but we'll become curious enough to figure things out. A quality question initiates change. What do we need to change here? How can we do that? Let's figure out a way to do this successfully. He is, but never leaves him where we found him. You know what that means? It means he grows. He develops abilities. Okay, so we're going to start by using some simple examples. And usually at this point, I would get out a little bucket that's for trash and a little bucket that's for treasure. Okay, and we're just going to take some simple questions and decide whether they're trash questions or treasure questions. And treasure questions would be the ones that we would like to continue asking. Okay, the trash ones we're not going to remember. Okay, so you can vote. I can't see all of you, but if you're unmuted, just say trash or treasure. If you're muted, raise your hand for one or the other. Okay, here's our first awesome question. Is it a good question or a bad question? Trash or treasure? Did you practice this week?
Trash. Trash.
Trash. Awesome. And why is it trash?
It's
But
a
they
yes.
don't want to admit it.
You can tell.
Yeah, we don't need that. Okay. The other thing is we might be asking them to lie. Okay. The other thing is it sounds kind of judgmental, don't you think? Okay. But what about this question? What was the most exciting thing you learned this week? Trash or treasure?
Treasure. Treasure.
Treasure. Excellent. And why is it treasure?
Makes them think.
Yeah, they had to think. They also had to have learned something, which means they had to have practiced. So in essence, we answered the first question, okay, but again, it immediately turns some of the learning over to them, okay, and they're thinking, oh, yeah, maybe she is interested in what I have to say. Okay, let's go for another one. Do you know your goal for that piece?
Treasure.
Okay. In essence, a very good treasure, because if they don't know their goals, what did they accomplish? Okay. But does this make it a little bit better? Can you tell me your goal in your own words?
Right.
Ooh, it took me a while to learn that one. Okay. Because if they can say the goal in their own words, then you can say, how do you know you accomplished that goal? How did it sound? How did it feel? What got better? Okay, so that allows you to dig a little bit deeper into these questions. Okay, here's another question. What is the tempo marking?
Trash.
Trash. It can be answered in one word, can't it? Okay, and it really didn't take very much thinking. But what about this one? What might the tempo marking tell you about the character of this piece? What happens now? The child gets to imagine, well, what does it tell me about the character of this piece? And you know, if the character of the piece means something to the child, they're way more likely to be eager to learn it. And they're way more likely to play it in a manner that people in the audience can determine a character of the piece. I once knew a concert artist, well, I still know her, I just don't see her as often anymore, who said that she always imagines a story when she plays pieces. And she would go on the concert stage and tell us what she was thinking before she would play, which allowed us to be, ooh, where's that going to happen, or what's going to go on there? But if you allow children to do the same thing, well, I coach my students, when you're going to play on a recital, imagine your story, and it doesn't matter if the listeners in the concert hall know what you are thinking. What it matters, you will play it in a way that causes them to imagine. Whoa, now, what is the main reason we love music? We love music because it helps us communicate. And when there's something behind the music besides just those notes on the page, we are able to communicate more fully. What about this one? Did you fix that mistake? Okay, you can tell just by my tone that that's a trash. Okay, we're catching on to this. But again, kind of pulling in from what we used in the last question, what if instead we asked, how will you know you accomplished the goal that you were supposed to fix? And again, how will it feel? How will it sound? How did you practice so that you won't make that mistake in the future? Would you like some ideas on that? Okay, anything again that we're engaging the learner, we're involving them in the learning as an active part of the process. Okay, what about this one? Okay, we're ready to start a new piece. Do you think it looks hard? Well, clearly that's a trash, isn't it? Okay, all right, we're never going to tell them it looks hard. It's exciting to be challenged, but hard is a little judgmental, like maybe we think we can't do it. Okay, but what if we ask this? We're going to start a new piece. How does this compare to the last piece we learned? How is it the same? How is it different? Can you look at this piece and see some things that you already understand and you already feel great about? Can you listen to this piece? Tell me things you don't yet understand? Can you ask me about those things you're curious about? Okay, so those, can you see how those type questions are engaging the learner? Did you practice your exercise 5 times? All right, we all know that's completely judgmental. Okay, but what if instead we said, do you remember that practice exercise we created to solve that problem? How did you use it to solve the problem? And again, what got better? Did you find a better way to use that? Can you use that in the future when you have a similar situation? Okay, so are you getting the idea that we can develop really great questions that engage the student so they are no longer passive learners, but they're actively involved? And we can keep some curiosity alive, okay? But the best thing is that when we teach this way and they're to sparkle and they start to smile, that they are more likely to remember what they learned and to be able to use it in the next piece that they encounter. Asking questions is also a great way to help students develop reasoning skills. Better yet, we have to figure out those reasoning skills first. Okay, it helps us become someone who inspires the desire to learn. Okay, and so it helps them not just be little robots who are playing the right notes because we told them to, because they understand. Another great thing is that when we ask questions, we are able to form a better relationship with our students because it's interactive. So I have actually been doing distance teaching since I moved down here, and have accumulated students across the United States. And at one point several years ago, I had one of my very first piano students call me up from Chicago, and she said, we've just lost our piano teacher, and I hear that you teach online, and would you take my students? At that point, Skype was all we were doing. Okay, now Zoom or FaceTime works a whole lot better, and sometime we could go into all of that. And she said, they've been taking a couple years, and I'm most concerned about my son Max, because when he takes his lessons and when he practices, he tends to cry. But don't worry about that. Just go on and teach it. And I thought, I'm worried about that. That's a bad sign. Something is going dreadfully wrong. And I knew this mother, and I knew she was a lovely person. And so I thought, okay, I'm gonna help these children. So this was about the time that Bob and I had really been working hard on teaching by asking questions. And so I decided that when I was going to teach Max, her son, I would only teach by asking questions. And it was kind of fun because at first he kind of had this look on his face like, I'm here, but I don't want to be. Okay, but you start asking questions and you see them perk up and you see them get interested. And most of all, you see them become more capable. And it was very lovely for me to receive an email from the mother several weeks later. And she said, I am so glad you accepted my children as students. She said, of course, musically, they're growing. Their tone is better. They play more fluently. They're happier at their lessons. And she said, but really, the reason it is all so worthwhile is because every day after Max's lessons, he just can't stop smiling. Why was he smiling? Because he was engaged and he was involved and he was necessary, and it's invigorating for kids to come up with answers. One thing I will point out is that, when we teach by asking questions, it actually takes more skill on our part. Okay, it isn't like we just hand over all the responsibility. Okay, it's like parenting. We have to think what's going to be happening. We have to analyze what they've said. We have to come up with another invigorating question. But it is so rewarding to all the people involved. It's also easier to assess learning. If you ask questions and you answer or listen to the answers, you get to get into the mind of your pupils. Whoa, because sometimes amazing things are lurking in those beautiful little minds. You probably all heard stories of things like there was a little girl playing at a piano lesson, and her teacher had asked her to play a C scale, and she was reading the C scale out of her Hanon book, and she went up, oh wait, I should make it a G scale, that would work better. Okay, so she started up the G scale, and then all of a sudden she went back down. And the teacher said, okay, so the scale keeps going up. Do you see the notes going up on the staff? Can you play that scale for me again? And she did the same thing. She started up the scale and then started going down. And the teacher just couldn't figure it out. And finally, the mother said, she's looking at the music and the stems go up on the notes and suddenly the stems go down. And so if a student was doing something like that and we had no concept of what they were doing and we didn't ask them a question, we would be completely flabbergasted because not every student thinks the way we think, amazingly. Okay, and so when we ask questions and we listen in a non-judgmental way, we can assess what they're learning, and we can evaluate, and we can change our approach to meet the way that that child is thinking at that moment. So again, they become way more capable because they are understanding a whole lot more. So another thing I found, in addition to what we talked about, is, well, I've mentioned it, that their understanding increases. So I was teaching and it is the first time that hands play in contrary motion. Okay, so it kind of boggles the mind and the brain, and it's kind of hard to get things going physically. So I decided that I would demonstrate, and I played the beginning part of the song that he, and then I played the next part of the song, and I said, oh, before that, I said, I want you to listen, and I want you to tell me what is the same between those two parts and what is different. Now, this little boy was 6 years old. His mother happened to be the director of early childhood development at Furman University, which is right behind where I live now. She was sitting in the chair going, turning red, thinking, why did you ask this impossible thing of my little angel? And when I finished, the delightful little 6-year-old said, in his eloquent little 6-year-old language, the beginning was the same and the end was different because the hands went in different directions. And I said, wow, Parker, you are a great listener. I think you can play that for me without helping you anymore. And he did. And it wasn't because I was so brilliant. It was because kids, amazing thinking abilities. They will always surprise you when you give them a challenge. They will always come through. So about this time also, I was sitting in the office with my husband, Bob, and he was watching something on a computer, and he turned to me and he said, come over here, something exciting is happening. And I thought, well, I don't want to miss out on that. What's going on? And he said, this guy named Garlikov is teaching children about binary numbers. Okay, so I'm a musician. I'm not really very good in math. And he said, but he's doing it by asking questions. So I sidled my chair over and I watched this expert teach by asking questions. And, you know, he was teaching binary numbers. So the first thing he thought was the first thing we should think. How do I create curiosity? Ooh, what if, oh, and these were third graders at late afternoon in the day, okay? And so they're kind of rustling around anyway. And he started and he said, what if an alien came into our classroom and he had only 2 fingers? How would he learn to count? How many fingers do you have? And how did you learn to count? And so kids were curious. And he went through this whole 20-minute thing, asking questions, analyzing what they had perceived correctly, redoing the questions, and finally at the end of 20 minutes, he said to them, wow, I thought you didn't know anything about binary numbers when we started. I never told you a thing, and you all understand binary numbers. And we can do the same thing because we can lead children to understand. We can get them curious. We can get the stars in their eyes and their smiles on their faces because learning is exciting. So would you like to learn a little bit more about asking questions? The last time I did a talk similar to this, it was actually on distance learning, but I talked about keeping people engaged by asking questions. It was to Ashley's former group in Tennessee a couple weeks ago. And one of the very young teachers said to me, in all honesty, I don't know what questions to ask. I get ideas, and we've explored some questions, but I thought maybe we would take a minute to explore a few more so you would feel really competent and ready to go out today and ask some questions. So let's go back to that first teaching scenario that I gave you, where I was the authority and I was telling, maybe even demanding, okay? And what could I have done instead? First of all, one thing to remember is use the child's name when you ask questions. Okay, it involves them, and of course, always have eye contact. So what if I had said, Jimmy, do you think we could play music detective today? What do you see in your music that gives you clues about how this piece should be played? And have them find the different things. Okay, and which markings can you explain to me? Okay, and let them explain what they already know. But what markings make you curious? Because they're different and you've never encountered them before. Can you point to a marking you would like me to describe? We talked about tempo marking. What mood does it create? How will it make you feel? And how will you know if you were playing all of these markings? Those would have been so much better for me to than saying, shape the phrase like this, do this touch like that, make sure you include the markings because it's really important that you do all of these things. Okay, do you see how this would have inspired my students so much more? What questions should I have asked when I demonstrated? Okay, so what was your favorite thing that got better? I loved when your sounds became smooth and connected. Do you know what you did? Will you know how to do that when you go home? Do you need me to help you with that? Do you want to put your hand on my hand? Can I put my hand on yours and see how it feels? Can you describe why the sound got better or how it got better? How did you feel when it improved so much? Okay. And I love how much easier your sounds. Do you like the way it sounds too? Because ultimately, we want them to be very pleased with the responses. What are some other ways we might ask questions? Well, I think for one thing, we want to take Stephen Covey's idea of begin with the end in mind. And if we're starting a student on a new piece, we might be able to say to ourselves, what is the teaching goal of this piece? Why am I teaching this? What benefits will my student receive because they learned this piece? A lot better than saying, we're going to play this in the audition, we're going to play this, so we have to learn it, we have to get all those notes, we have to do everything just right. Okay, but then in our minds, to prepare us to be great teachers, if this is my desired goal, what do I have to do here? What questions do I have to ask? What skills does the student already have to play that piece? What skills do I need to develop? What previews or exercises might I have to prepare? And often, you know, the fun of that is that every child has distinctly different needs. So we might have in our own mind a very big set of things that we would plan or goals that we would have. And yet their understanding is so different that we have to create new exercises that we hadn't dreamed of before. That's wonderful because it keeps us alert. We have to always be willing as teachers to not only ask questions, but to look up and consider possibilities. We don't want to be stuck in our old ways that we had before we started teaching by asking questions. So as we kind of wrap up here today, in case you have more questions, and I'll try to stay in the time limit here, we can't give a child ability, but we can lead them by giving them tasks, teaching him to accomplish it, teaching him to be curious, teaching him to ask his own questions. Oh, now that is the epitome. We might get really great at asking questions, but unless students can learn to ask their own questions, they'll never be able to go on without us. Sort of like the first scenario where I just told my students what to do all of the time. And so that means as teachers, we have to open up opportunities for the student to ask their question, that they're not afraid that they'll be judged, that they're not afraid that we'll say we don't have time for that. I can't think of anything worse than saying to a child, don't ask me questions, we don't have time for that. If we don't have time for questions, we don't have time for lots of stuff, okay? So encourage them because that allows them to earn their own capability and build strength that will last for a lifetime. As teachers, we want to create that environment so that questions are welcome. They're not afraid, that they feel respected, that they feel like we believe in them above everything else. And when a child realizes his potential, he makes contributions to everyone he meets, not just us. So I'm going to share a little story in conclusion that is not related to music or a particular instrument, just about sort of a process of going through learning to ask questions. So I am a grandmother and I have 6 beautiful grandchildren, and the oldest was about 4. We loved to play and read and do things together. And of course, I gave him his first piano lessons when he was 4, all right, which was more of a thrill for me than him, I'm sure, but he still plays, so that is great. So one day we decided that he would get on his big wheel and we would go to the park nearby. And so we rode the big wheel down a couple blocks to the park, and we came upon a climbing apparatus. Now, Graham is a quiet, thoughtful type kid. He isn't one of those rambunctious kids just ready to jump in to do everything. And I thought maybe he had to develop an adventurous spirit. So I said to him, I think we should climb the jungle gym. What do you think? He's, no, I'm scared. I don't want to try that. And I said, oh, I think we could do it together. He said, no, mommy will be mad. I'll be mad if she finds out you had me do something I was afraid to do. Later, his mom did say to me, why did you have him do something I wouldn't like? But she would have liked it. All right. So anyway, I was finally getting smart. Alrighty. And I decided that I would teach my grandson better than I taught my own children. And so I said, can you see where I'm putting my hand? Where am I placing my next hand? How about your foot? Where would your great red tennis shoe fit on that bar? Can you keep climbing? It was a painfully slow process. I had to stand there for the longest time, smiling and encouraging while he frightfully went up to the top. And he got to the top, and I'm thinking, yes, and he turned around and, Grandma, I can't get down. And so, of course, we had to go through the same process. Where would you put your foot? How would you do this? What do you think would work on that next step? And when he got to the bottom, he said a really amazing thing to me. He said to me, Grandma, I get it. I can do anything because you believe in me. It changed my life, but it wasn't the end of the learning story. I was so thrilled that he knew that I believed in him more than anything in the world. But I wanted him to believe in himself. I wanted him to discover how to ask his own questions. I wanted him to know that he was totally capable of any challenge he would encounter in life. Isn't that what you want for your students? And can't we guide them the same way? So in conclusion, my challenge and my invitation to you is be curious, be interested, delighted, and be delightful, and enjoy your teaching today. Thank you.